I do. I just have a couple of thoughts. First, I agree with you, Mr. Joyce. I've actually just, I think last week, the week before, did one of the required ethics trainings. And every time I go through it, I scratch my head about certain provisions that I think to myself, to give you an idea, I have a very well-known food cupboard in my community, not-for-profit, 501c3. They're doing a food collection. I think I was told I couldn't put a basket in my district office because that violates the House rules. It's like, okay, I don't know what possible benefit that gives me by having. So, it's a small, silly example, but there are so many times when I'll say, that's an ethics violation, but this isn't. So without any prejudging what the results would be, I think it's incumbent upon us, particularly since you cite social media and some of the things that were not around probably when the original, maybe even the current ones were written. I think really it does behoove us periodically to look at what our ethics standards are and to think about, does this make any sense? And who is it intended to benefit? Who is it intended to, what is the intent of this? So and it's funny, I had this list of proposed amendments that I had written yes next to yours before hearing you speak, so thanks for offering that. I would certainly support it. Sort of curious on the 72-hour issue. So part of this is based on my experience in the state legislature. So in New York, we had a rule, if a bill was introduced on a Monday, it would have to have what we call the order of third reading, first reading, second reading, third reading, and you couldn't vote on it until Thursday, similar to the 72-hour rule. But in our legislature, if a bill was amended, the clock started again. So an amendment changes the nature of the bill, right? If an amendment's agreed to, the bill is different than the original form. And every single time you amended a bill, it had to go through another 3-day waiting period. The only way we could get around it under the New York State Constitution is if the governor issued a statement to us that said, you waive the reading. So in an emergency, the governor can do it. I don't think it works well here. You're not going to have the president sign it. But 2/3 in my mind is, so first of all, the question I was going to ask is, if an amendment is passed on the floor that changes the text of the original bill, is there a 72-hour waiting period that you envision then with the new bill before it could have final passage?
I can't speak to Ms. Cammack's text, but my text just takes all of the rules of the existing McGovern 72-hour rule. I'll give you due recognition there.
I hope you'll keep the name if you keep the
We might just change it to govern.
Okay.
But
That works.
it'll be a nod to your chairmanship and your great contribution to this rule. But so it was, how does the existing 72-hour rule work if a bill gets amended on the floor?
It doesn't apply to that, yeah.
Okay, so it wouldn't apply to that.
Which seems to me then kind of an end around on the whole. I mean, you essentially, because an amendment could be the elimination of every word in the substitute of a new, right? That's what we do when we have amendments in the nature of a substitute. So it's not foolproof because you change effectively by amending the bill. You could change the nature of it. But
You're already looking for a workaround.
Well, I'm just saying it exists. I mean, it's sort of like,
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, any fence with a gap in it isn't a fence. It's just like a series of posts. And so, I mean, it seems to me like that's the end around. The other thing that I would say is, while I would struggle to maybe find a way to pierce the 72-hour rule, I think 2/3 of the House is just a bar too high to get over. If you really had an emergency and you had to pierce the 72-hour rule, 2/3 of the members having agreed to it, seems to me that would be such that you might find yourself in a position where you really need to do something and you're not able to because the 2/3 is just too high. So I mean, I think I understand what you're trying to do, but I think the two problems are the 2/3 is too high a bar, and the fact that you can amend a bill and change the text of it really leaves you with no 72-hour rule at all. I don't know if you want to respond to that or just acknowledge that I'm right on the second one.
Oh, bless your heart. That's what we say in the South.
I know, that's my friend Louise Slaughter used to say, bless you.
Well, no, and to the point about the 72-hour rule, I know that there's other proposals on the table that go further than the 72 hours. There's, the 3 business days, you have the 72 hours as a whole, you have even less. I'm not saying that 72 hours is the end-all, be-all, but I can't remember the last time that we've had an open amendment process that we could participate in that would actually trigger a situation where that
No, but you
would
could have a
happen.
structure, well, we do a lot of structured rules here where amendments are on the floor. We're voting on amendments all the time. If you were to adopt 3 or 4 amendments, it might dramatically change the underlying text of the bill, in which case there's no waiting period for that. You're going to move to immediate passage, which seems to me sort of defeats the 72-hour rule.
I would ask this, please adopt the amendment, and we'll see if that's a problem. If it
There you
is,
go.
we'll take your recommendation and clamp down on that loophole.
I second the gentleman.
Well, I mean, the way to do it, to address it would be anytime the bill's amended, it starts the clock again. I'm just not sure people want to do that. That is the way to guarantee you have 72 hours. You'd still have the question of how to pierce the 72-hour rule if you had a real emergency, you needed to get it done. And to that point, I think 2/3 is just too high a bar. It's a standard that you'd almost never be able to achieve.
But to the point that Mr. Massey was making about the 2/3 rule, and Chairman McGovern, you were saying, there were situations where the 72-hour rule had to be waived, and Ukraine was one of the examples. 2/3 of the conference voted in support of those pieces of legislation. So I think that your point about the 2/3 is actually far more viable than what you've stated. So
What did I state?
that it wouldn't be, that it's too high of a threshold.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, there's certainly some instances where you could reach it, but I think there's many times one side might view it differently. But I acknowledge it.
I mean, if it's truly an emergency situation, 2/3 of the majority, of the conference shouldn't be a problem.
Well, you could just,
When I wrote this amendment, I anticipated we'd have 60% of Congress, the big red wave, and I wanted to make sure it would be bipartisan, so I thought we should set it at 60.
you could always have a waiver of the leader of the other side,
Well,
which doesn't require 2/3, but just waives the,
I don't trust the other
72-hour
side
period.
any more than I trust our leaders.
well, there you go.
Well, and if I may, I just want to say, I do appreciate the remarks that you've made about some of the ethics recommendations today. When Hurricane Ian rolled through, I immediately tried to do a
Right.
supply drive of simple things like food and
No, you can't do
water
it.
and basics. We couldn't do it,
Right.
which is absolutely absurd. So there's a lot of things that I think we need to fix within the ethics rules, and then also to your point about diversifying Congress. I'm married to a firefighter. I come from a very blue-collar, working-class family. If we're going to develop more talent within the ranks of Congress, we need to be able to provide an environment that people can do that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to have one group of people that are independently wealthy that can do this job. So I appreciate your remarks.
Well, I appreciate y'all being here and your thoughtfulness, and I'll,
And let me just say, just one final things. One is, the 72-hour rule is a good rule. And to the extent that, it needs to be waived, it should be sparingly and for emergencies. And if you guys decide that you want a vote to be able to waive it, that's up to you. But the idea of giving people really not, 3 days in, midnight, 11:59, that's one day, and the next day, and then, 1 a.m. in the morning, and that's your 3 days. That doesn't work. It should be 72 hours. Like, for example, the rail bill that we're dealing with today, where no matter where you stand, we don't like where we are, but it is an emergency. There's an example. I don't know whether we get 2/3 to be able to, to bring it to the floor earlier, but whatever. But putting that aside, let me just say one other thing. A number of people have talked about these single-issue bills, bringing bills to the floor that are just on one particular topic. My experience here is that life is complicated, and if you really want to solve a problem, sometimes it doesn't fit into this neat little silo. I do a lot of work on food insecurity and hunger. Right, on the Agriculture Committee, right? But to solve that problem is not just SNAP, it's not just our food and nutrition programs, it's other things too. And, it's housing, it's whether people have a job, whether people get paid a decent wage. So sometimes these issues intersect with a whole bunch of other issues. The Farm Bill in and of itself you can't really say that's just one topic. It covers a whole range of things. not just aid to our farmers, but it covers our food and nutrition programs. It covers a whole bunch of stuff. So I get this idea that, you know, people want to kind of simplify things and make things easier to digest, you know, for people who may be watching. But if you really want to solve some of these problems, sometimes it requires bringing in other topics. Again, not to confuse things, but to, you know, to actually effectively legislate and get something done. I mean, otherwise you're talking about, you know, doing 9 different bills for what you could do 1 bill for. So as you figure out with your leadership how you narrow down these topics, I mean, I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that, you know, solving problems doesn't always fit into one nice, neat little discrete category. It involves a lot of different things. And again, the bills like the Farm Bill is an example. It's multi-topics.